Welcome, everyone, to our regular weekday morning podcast on Kabbalah for Heretics, during which, for the past, now get ready, for the past 30 years, every weekday morning, with very rare exceptions, every weekday morning, we have been going through the Zohar, volume by volume, cover to cover, page by page, and sentence by sentence. Of the Doing that, we've finished, as you know, volumes 1, 2, and 3, and are very close to finishing volume 4. And again, as I've said, don't expect that means in the next week or two, because we go through it thoroughly and slowly. Let's get back to where we left off in our last podcast. As you know, these two great rabbis have been traveling, and not an official member of their party, but kind of hanging out with them, is this young boy leading an ass carrying a jar of honey on its back. And I've spoken about all the esoteric meanings of that, because obviously it's esoteric. An ass with a jar of honey on its back? Anyway, the young boy finally breaks his silence and reveals himself to be not the ground, and they invite him to be part of them. And they officially uh, make him a rabbi. They give him smicha. I didn't mention that uh, when we touched on it in the past several podcasts. But when they say, from now on thou shalt be known as Rabbi so-and-so, that's smicha. That is the official passing on of the privileges and wisdom of the rabbi to someone. It's the equivalent of going to a rabbinic academy. If a rabbi, a great rabbi, says to you, from now on you shall be known as rabbi, that's even better than a diploma from a rabbinic academy. So he's been made a member of their party and a rabbi, this young man. The two rabbis have been discoursing, and Rabbi Yitzchak um, has been talking about the sacrifice, the temple sacrifice. And when he finishes, we come to the place where we left off. And it says, the youth then followed, taking as his text, quote, the king by judgment establishes the land, but a man of offerings overthrows it, from Proverbs. Now, this is the traditional midrash. This is the traditional way that commentary is made on a particular verse of scripture. Very often, as in this case, by quoting a different other verse of scripture that illuminates the verse of scripture that you're looking at. The king here, now remember, this is just an ordinary looking kid. The king here, he said, is the Holy One, blessed be he. Now listen, the king here is the Holy One, blessed be he. Why is that particular description, Holy One, blessed be he, used? Again, as with everything else in the Zohar, it is a reference to the 10 Sephiros. Each of the Sephiros has a partsuf, a hidden meaning, a hidden identity, which really explains what it is and how it relates to the other Sephiros and what that all means. The name that you see on diagrams of the Sephiros, Keter, Chachma, Binah, etc., are really meaningless. it's the hidden meaning behind that, the secret meaning behind that, that really gives definition to what each sephira is and what its relationship to all the other sephiras are. And in this case, it says, the king, the youth followed, taking as his text, the king by the king here, he said, is the Holy One, blessed be he. That is the parts of the sixth sephira, Tiferet. I wish I had a drawing of the sephiras in front of you. Tiferet, the sixth sephira, is right in the middle. And all of the disparate sephiras that have been broken up by the creation are drawn back together again in the Holy One, blessed be he. And it's also called the God of Israel, because Israel reunites the differing parts of God. So the youth says, the king by judgment establishes the land, but a man of offerings overthrows it. The king here, he said, is the Holy One, blessed be he. So he's not just talking about God in general. He's talking about a very specific aspect of God. That aspect of God that finally reunites all the broken apart pieces of God. Tiferet, the Holy One, blessed be he. It's also called the smaller face, Hatika Kadisha. Has many partsufim, but it's the only sephira, if you look, that tells us this. How does it tell us this? It's the only sephira to which all the other 9 sephiras are directly connected. Each sephira is connected to at least one other sephira, the one opposite to it. But they are not all interconnected in one final place of unity, except in Tiferet. That's the proof of the fact that it is the reunified God who is the God of Israel. Eheye, I am, finally, I am. Not I am becoming, not I have been, but Eheye, I am, the final realization in God of its own unity. So the young boy is very careful to let us know that is the aspect of God that it's discussing, in order to amplify the text. Quote, the king by judgment establishes the land, but the man of offerings over, who is the epitome of the patriarchs. This is a young boy, scruffy, leading an ass. So he's talking about the king by judgment establishes the land, but a man of offerings overthrows it. He says, well, first of all, what I mean by the king here is the Holy One, blessed be he. That is only the God of Israel, the reunified God, complete once again by virtue of Israel completing it. Only he creates the land. And you notice it says the king by judgment establishes the land. He says judgment here is Yakov, Jacob, who is the epitome of the patriarchs. A man of offerings, he says, is Esau, who used to ask questions about offerings, but never bring any. Or again, I can say that offerings is the negation of judgment, being the elevation of mercy. And quote, therefore, a man of offerings overthrows it. Again, what the Zohar is turning to is the mystical differentiation between Jacob and Esau. It's a major archetypal incident, major. And it is ultimately their reconciliation that brings about the perfection of the land. What do they represent? Get ready, you're not going to like this, some of you. Esau represents the father of the Indo-European Gentiles. Jacob represents the father of the Jewish people. And even in their womb, the Old Testament tells us, they battled each other. So much so that their mother, goes to the priest of the temple, and asks him, what is going on here in me? And he tells her, this is all in the Old Testament, two nations are at war in your womb. One shall be larger than the other, but one shall lead the other. Listen to that. Two nations, Jews and Gentiles, are at war in your womb, he tells her, and they will be at war outside of your womb. But it is by their reconciliation that God will eventually become whole again, one again. And we do see that. We see that later in Genesis. That's our work. That's the work the Jew has been charged with. And I have to make it very clear. The work is not to convert the Gentile to Judaism. That is not the purpose. That is not what the Jew is chosen to be. The Jew is not chosen to convert the Gentile into Judaism. Judaism is practically a non-issue in the Zohar. The religion itself, coming into the community of Israel, the house of Israel, is a spiritual, theurgic action. I'm attempting to do that with those of you in the listening audience who may not be Jews from birth. Just our interaction right now is a step toward uniting Jew and Gentile in general, not just you and me. I mean, that's not enough, you and me. That's nice. But and are coming into some kind of relationship in a theurgic way is a reunification of the two sides of God, the left-hand side, Esau, and the right-hand side, Jacob. I'm always aware of that when I'm talking to people who are obviously not Jews up here, which is most of the people. Inside myself, I am renewing the relationship between Jew and Gentile, theurgically. I'm not saying to him, oh, yes, you're a Gentile, and I'm bringing you over to the side of the Jews. That would be bullshit. That's the way the Christians do their conversion. God forbid we should do that. Everything is silent and inward. And why? Not for the glory of the Jewish people, not for the glory of the Jewish religion, hardly. But for the unity, and suffers from it. There are many passages in the Old Testament where he says that he suffers from this disunity within himself that came about by his creating Jew and Gentile. And man, us of the community of Israel, are intended to bring back that unity by reuniting theurgically Jew and Gentile. Not religiously. It has nothing to do with religion. This has nothing to do with Jews trying to convert Gentiles to Judaism. In fact, the rabbis don't make a big fuss over that. What they do and this is by tradition and rabbinic law, is if a Gentile comes to the rabbi and wants to convert, he is sent away 3 times. If he comes back after the 3rd time, then the rabbi will make him a member of the community of Israel. But he's sent away 3 times before that. It's too important to do lightly. The Gentile coming for conversion must deeply, seriously want it. And that need, that want on his part, is evidenced by his willingness to come back 3 times after being rejected 3 times, to come back a 4th time after having been rejected 3 times. There are Gentiles who claim to be very attracted to Judaism, who have gone to the rabbis and have been rejected and are infuriated by it. You look at that. Look how chauvinistic they are. I come here there with a good heart. I want to become a Jew. And he says, no, no, go away. How dare he? Even when I explain to such Gentiles the reason for him doing that, they still resent being sent away. Why? Because their want to be a member of the community of Israel is very superficial and easily broken. How many of you here understand what I'm saying? I hope I'm making it clear. So I'm asking the 2 recording technicians. There they go. They both are saying it's clear. And that gives me hope that I'm being clear for those of you in the listening audience. This is a very important. You have no idea how many people I've talked to who are indignant that the rabbis send away candidates for conversion. And he said, well, why do you Jews not allow Gentiles to convert? I said, but that's not true. Oh, yes, it is. Oh, yes, it is true. Don't you tell me they don't. They send them away. You come to convert, and they send you away. I said, yes, and I explained it to him. He still would not accept it. In his mind, the rabbis send away candidates because Jews don't want Gentiles near them. That's in his mind, and in the mind of many who feel as he does. And from where does that belief come? That crypto-anti-Semitic belief? It comes from the Sitra Achra. It comes from the left-hand side of God. The last is that Jew and Gentile should come back together again. That's the last thing the ego wants. The last thing. It's the source of all anti-Semitism. I'll give you an example that absolutely just blew me away. An article in the New York Times yesterday or the day before. There was a lesbian march, I believe in San Francisco. And it's traditional, they do it every year. But this year, there were Jewish lesbians who carried signs with the Star of David on it. And they were told they could not participate in the march if they carried such signs, identifying themselves as Jews. These are the left-wing liberal lesbians who, if there's anyone who knows about persecution, they should. Oh, and the reason is because it could incite violence among non-Jews. Well, so could their march alone. And I guarantee you, if a group of Palestinian lesbians dressed in their traditional Muslim dress and carrying uh, Arab flags were to want to participate in the march, they would not be told to go away. That would be accepted in them. It is because they are Jews that Esau rejects them through the agency of these left-wing liberal lesbians. I'm not criticizing the march. I think it's wonderful. What I am criticizing is the horrible hypocrisy that you see in that when it comes to Esau and Jacob. It still exists. There you see it. Judgment, he says, is Jacob, who is the epitome of the patriarchs. A man of offerings is Esau, who is asked to questions about offerings, but never brings any. You remember when Jacob brings offerings, they're abundant, but Esau's are not. Or again, I can say that offerings is the negation of judgment, being the elevation of mercy, and therefore, quote, a man of offerings overthrows it. If you look carefully at that statement, the Zohar is praising Esau. Esau appears to be a very negative figure in the Old Testament and is most likely interpreted that way. But the Zohar is saying that's not the mercy. And it tells us that Jacob is from the side of judgment. Listen to this. It's not as we think it is. It's not that Jacob is totally the good guy and Esau the bad guy. On the contrary. I hope you're all receiving this. I hope you're all getting it. It has to do absolutely with right now, this moment, you out there, me over here, you out there in the world encountering Jews, Jews out there in the world encountering non-Jews, and even when not encountering them, participating in a mystical, theurgical encounter within the mind's eye. That concludes this morning. I'll mark my place and we'll continue tomorrow morning where we left off. In the meantime, let me ask the two recording technicians, they're the only ones I invite to these, to be stand-ins for those of you in the listening audience, and ask them if they have any comments or questions, hoping that their comments and questions will reflect those which some of you in the listening audience may have. Yeshai, you have a comment or a question? All right, let's hear them. And we do this not to show how smart Yeshai and David are, because they are very, but to help you in the listening audience better understand what you're listening to by covering questions and comments that you very well may have. Go ahead, Yeshai. So powerful. The oral Torah praises Esau, very indirectly, yes, but praises Esau. You have to read between the lines to see it, but that's oral Torah. As representing offerings which God's side of mercy, the reconciliation of Jacob and Esau is the constant theurgic healing of God and perfection of the land as we are doing here, inwardly, not having anything to do with religion. Baruch Hashem. Thank you, Yeshai. Thank you. There's one point that you raised at the beginning of your comment that I kind of skipped over. I think you were having a little trouble with the passage also. Oh, autocorrected. All right. But anyway, I was going to suggest that you listen to the podcast again, which I'm sure you will. Both of you, God bless you both for being here and for recording, editing, and posting these podcasts to a very large listening, our listening audience since we started, which is not that long ago. What would you say? About 9 months ago we started these podcasts? At least that. 5,000 listeners. And the number of people who subscribe to these podcasts has increased since that time by almost 50%. And we owe it, everybody out there listening, we owe it to David and Yeshai. You have no idea how early in the morning it is here. And every morning they're here going through this laborious task. God bless you both, David and Yeshai. And thank you. Now, as I do at the conclusion of the podcast every morning, of the memory of our departed beloved friend and fellow Kohen, Leonard Cohen. Yiskadal v'yiskadash me'abo, Omo divrach Yerusei v'yamlech malchusei, v'chayachon v'yom echon v'chayei d'chol beis Yisrael, b'galo uvizman kore v'imru amen. Yehi shmira abo mevarach le'elamu me'omaya. Yisparach v'yistabach v'yisba'av v'yisamam, v'yisnasei v'yisadav v'yisalei v'yisalal. Shmei dekutcha b'richu, le'elam mincha b'irachasa v'shirasa tashvachasa, v'nechamasa damaran b'omo v'imru amen. Yehi shlomo rabba min shemaya, v'chayinu aleinu v'yakol Yisrael v'imru amen. Osei shalom b'mamov, hu ya'asei shalom. Oleinu v'yakol Yisrael v'imru amen. All right, now we'll end here. We'll resume in our next podcast. And as always, Yivarechecha